All right, in the Devar Malchut that we usually learn, what's called the words of royalty, speeches of the Lubavitcher Rebbe that he gave in 1991, 1992. As this year, it's a little bit sort of hard to incorporate what the Rebbe said then with what's going on now. Why? Because then the speech that he gave was on when Passover falls on Shabbat in Parshat Shmini. And because of that, we read Parshat Shmini 8 times. 8 times. And there's a way we're in Mincha of Shabbat, and then on Yom Sheni B'Chamishi, we do that a couple times. And it ends up that we read it 8 times. But this year we don't read it 8 times. So the Rebbe, in that speech that he made in 1991, he deals tremendously with the number 8 and how the number, especially when it's 8 times and etc., which is not relevant to this year. So there's ample other things from the Rebbe that we'll learn. So therefore, this year I don't think we're going to learn the Devar Malchut. In any case, we did learn it last year because Pesach, if I remember correctly, came on a Shabbat last year. We did learn it last year, and so it is up. It's available for anybody. I can also put it up for last year. But let's learn. Here we go. Let's go. This is a speech of Lubavitcher, a series of speeches. Here, this the Rebbe gave in 1958. 1958. This is speeches that the Rebbe gave about Passover. There are also a lot of very interesting speeches about the Haggada, and I'll post them. God willing, I'll post those ones that we're going to in Likuti Sichas Aleph, the first book of Likuti Sicha, of the speeches of the Rebbe. Okay, but let's go. Passover. Hagam, even though, let's make this bigger here. Also, this will be in English, so. In Hebrew, I'm sorry. Even though the Haggada, it starts off, at first glance, it starts off, what's the Haggada? The Haggada, it is a commandment in the Torah to talk about the miracles that happened to the Jews when they left Egypt. It's a miracle. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to talk about all the amazing miracles that God did when he took us out of Egypt. Okay, one reason for that is to let us know and to remind us that God is active in the world. God cares and is active in the world, and that he'll change the world, and he'll do it for the Jews. So no matter how bad the situation seems for the Jews, we have to always remember that God is, I mean, he's waiting for his time. I don't know why he's waiting, but he's waiting, and that there'll be major, big changes, just like there was when we left Egypt. In other words, it's not a history story. This is a lesson for what's going to be. It was a free sample when we left Egypt of what's going to be, what the Moshiach is going to do. And the one big thing that was lacking when we left Egypt that Moses did not do is he did not change the priorities of the Jewish people. He didn't change the priorities of the Jewish people. To a certain degree he did, but not really. First of all, the Jews didn't want to leave Egypt. And 4/5, in fact, did not leave after the Egyptians were, decimated. So the Jews wanted to stay. They didn't want to leave. It was scary going to this. And when they left, so they were always making trouble and they always wanted to go back and etc. No matter what Moses said, they said, let's do the opposite. We went through this a lot of times. You don't have to go through the disappointing details that were back then. But Moshiach will cause that Jewish people want to go out of Egypt, and that's the whole idea of Chassidut Chabad. The teachings of the Chabad Rebbes, the teachings, the tens of books, hundreds of books that the Rebbes wrote are intended that we should learn them and start to understand, on one hand, what we're missing, how close God is to us, how good God is, how amazing God is, and how doing what God wants is the most incredible, gift that a person can have, right? A person that you can do what God wants. Well, there's nothing greater than that. To feel that, to actually feel that. That's what everybody's going to want. Everybody's going to want to feel. That's what Moshiach is going to bring to the world, an appreciation of the Creator. The whole world will be filled with the appreciation of the Creator. That's the main thing Moshiach is going to bring us. How amazing this world is, how amazing every human being is, how much potential every human being has for good, for love. That's okay. So that's why we relate this going out of Egypt all the time, to remind us that there's something really big waiting for us. But let's go into the details what we're back there. Okay. One of the commandments, the commandment from the Torah, one of the 613 commandments, 245 positive commandments, is to talk about going out of Egypt on the night of Passover. Okay. You can buy yourself an English one. You can look it up offline. Look it online. An English translation of the Haggada of Passover. Haggada of Passover. Hagam, even though Asher Haggada, the Haggada begins with the Sichot, it says Avadim Hayinu, that we were slaves to Paro in Egypt. That's how it starts. She'achrei shalas manishtana, that comes after the son asks manishtana. Make it a little bit bigger. Right? It starts off with the 4 questions. How is this night different from all the other nights? It says on all of the other nights we can eat matzah or chometz, but in Chabad they start off on all the other nights we dip. We don't dip at all, and the other nights we dip twice. In any case, for what's going on? Why is this night different? And then that's the child asks. Something's going on, and every child asks. And then they start to tell the Haggada. We used to be slaves in Egypt. This is the commandment of Haggada to Lebincha. It's a commandment in the Torah. Tell your son, your children, what's about going out of Egypt. We were slaves to. That's how it starts off. It puts this magid before Heilach Ma'anya is Muchach Asher Piskazu Hi Atchalas Seder Haggada. Even before that, before the children ask, we say, this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in Egypt before they took us out. Right? Now and that's even before the children ask. So it seems that the Haggada of Passover does not start with, we used to be slaves in Egypt a long time ago, right? That it starts off a couple of, before that, right? One paragraph before that. One paragraph before that. How does the Haggada start off? It starts off with the beginning. How does it start off? This is the bread of affliction. We point to the matzah. This is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in Egypt. Before now we are slaves. We used to be slaves. Now we're free. Anyone who wants to come and eat, anybody who needs to can come and eat the Passover offering. That's what we say. Heilach Ma'anya. And then after that, we say that the son asks the question. And then after that, the third paragraph is Avadim Hayinu. Avadim Hayinu, that seems to be the beginning, right? But in fact, it's not. It must be that it starts off with, this is the bread of affliction. That's what it brings. Okay. Therefore, we see that the explanation of all the Rebbes that were explaining the Haggada of Passover on the night of Passover, which is because of the mitzvah of talking about going out of Egypt, they would begin to explain with Heilach Ma'anya. Heilach Ma'anya is Aramaic for this is the bread of affliction. This is the poor bread. Yesh Makom Lomar, we can say, Asher Haggada, that the Haggada of Passover begins from Kiddush. Maybe we can say that it begins from Kiddush, which that's even before. Like it says in the Rishonim. There's some rabbis that say that therefore, why don't we make a blessing, right? On every commandment that we do in Judaism, we make a blessing. Here's a commandment in Judaism to talk about going out of Egypt. It's a commandment that on the night of Passover to talk about going out of Egypt. Why don't we make a blessing? Because we've already made the blessing when we say in Kiddush, Zeichel Yetziat Mitzrayim in the Kiddush. Okay, so let's just clarify this for people who don't know what in the world we're talking about over here. On the night of the holiday, and every holiday, so you make a meal. You make a meal. The beginning of the meal is that you take a cup of wine and you make a blessing, right? Blessed are you, God, that you gave me this holiday. Give us this holiday. It's more complicated than that. That's so it is also on Passover. That's how we start off the evening. Everybody sits down, you have matzah in front of you, you have all these other, then somebody takes a cup and lifts it up and says a blessing. Thank you, God, that you gave us this holiday. Give us this holiday. Then after that, he drinks the cup of wine. That's the beginning. After that, paragraph number 2 says, this is the bread of affliction. Paragraph number 3, the children ask the 4 questions. Paragraph number 4, it says, we used to be servants in Egypt. Oh, so some people say that this paragraph number 4, that's where we begin the Haggada. We were slaves in Egypt. That starts the story of Egypt. Other people say, no, that's not where. It starts off when we say, hey, Lachmanya. Why do they say that? Because this is called the beginning. It's in the science. It says Magid. Magid means that's where we start saying about going out of Egypt. And some people say, no, it starts when we make Kiddush. When we make Kiddush, that's thanking God. That's the beginning. The first Rebbe of Chabad, he says like this. Why don't we make a blessing on the night, on this commandment that we're doing of talking about going out of Egypt? Why don't we make a blessing? So some people say because that's the Kiddush. The first Rebbe says no. But we'll tell that answer in a second. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, he said, Asher Aviv, that his father, who was the 5th Rebbe of Chabad, he asked Sha'aloto b'katnato, his father asked him when he was a small child, but the father, the 5th Rebbe of Chabad, when he was the Rebbe, he asked his son, who was the previous Rebbe, when he was a child, why don't we make a blessing on this commandment of talking about going out of Egypt, right in the night? But Lo Yadain, he didn't know what to answer. And his father said, Asher b'katnuto, that when he was small, his father asked him the same question. And he also didn't know what to answer. And his father told him, this is the 4th Rebbe of Chabad, said that when he was small, he asked his father the same question, why don't we make a blessing on this commandment of talking about going out of Egypt? Why? And he didn't know the answer either. And he said that his father told him that when he was small, he asked his grandfather, who was the first Rebbe of Chabad, the same question. And when he didn't know what to answer, his grandfather asked him. So his father said, "She'en mevorchim al brachas hamazon, brachas hamazon." He said, "There's another commandment. He said, I have another question for you. After you finish eating, there's a commandment to make a blessing. You have to make a blessing after eating. You don't make a blessing on that blessing. The whole entire Haggada is a big blessing. The whole entire Haggada is one big blessing. And you don't make a blessing on a blessing." So every commandment there is in the Torah, you make a blessing, a positive commandment. Something you do, you make a blessing before you do it. And there's a commandment to bless after eating. On that, you don't make a blessing because it's a blessing itself. The same thing on the Haggada, you don't make a blessing because the Haggada itself is a blessing. Haggada, the blessing, the whole Haggada of Passover that we talk about, it takes, a half an hour. If you give explanations, even longer. The whole entire Haggada of Passover is one big blessing. And we don't make a blessing on a blessing. Just like you don't make a blessing on blessing after eating. Admar Emsa'i, the second Rebbe of Chabad, he mentioned the opinion of the Rif, Rabbeinu Alfasi, it's called. Sheyotzim bebrachas HaKiddush, that why don't we make a blessing on the Haggada? Because we make Kiddush, that we said before. According to the Rashba, another opinion, Shalom ben Aderet says, these are rabbis that lived, what is it, 800 years, 700 years ago. Masbik Zechir is called Gdo. Then all you have to do is say anything. right? But the Alter Rebbe asked a question on this. He said he doesn't like these answers. Why? Because you have to mention going out of Egypt every day. So why don't you make right? That's called a blessing. The blessing of going out of Egypt on the night of Passover is not just saying something. It itself is the big story that we tell. It's a commandment in the Torah to talk about going out of Egypt on the night of Passover. It doesn't say what you're supposed to say. It doesn't say, you could just say, tonight we left Egypt, but a long time, that's sufficient? It says, no, that's not sufficient. The commandment is to tell a story. You have to tell details. So now, according to this, we can understand why the first Rebbe, the Kiddush, is not part of the Haggada. Because the Kiddush, that's just mentioning a little bit. And the Haggada is going into the details of what happened, how we were slaves in Egypt, how we suffered, how we cried out to God, how God answered us, how he did amazing miracles. Therefore, the beginning of the explanation of the Rebbe's and the Haggada, this comes from Heilach Ma'anya, and not before it. So Heilach Ma'anya, this thing about this is the bread of affliction, this is the beginning already of the details, talking about the details of how we left Egypt back then, and how there's even going to be more amazing details in the future. According to this, Al Pizeh, this thing of Heilach Manya begins the Seder Haggada. So if so, the Rebbe says that's the beginning of the Haggada of Passover is Heilach Ma'ani. Now we can understand why it ends up Hashta Hacha, now we are here. Lashana Haba, next year we're going to be in the land of Israel. Hashta Avadim, now we are slaves. Next year we're going to be free. That's how we end up. Look at, how does it say? Let me just translate it for us. Hey Lachmanyam, I'll show you where it is. It's this here sentence over here. Hey Lachmanya, this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate when they were in the land of Egypt. Anyone who is cast down comes and eats. Anyone who desires can come and eat from the passive offering. Hashta now, let's see if I can get closer. Hashta now, hacha, we are here. Lashana Abba, next year we're going to be in the land of Israel. Hashta now, avadim, we are slaves. Lashana Abba, next year we're going to be free. Okay, what about people like me? I live in Israel, right? Maybe I don't have to say this, huh? What do you mean? Now we're here. Next year we're going to be in the land of Israel. I'm already in Israel, right? Not so fast. Now we are slaves. Next year we're going to be free. Hey, I'm not a slave, huh? I don't have to say this. Don't worry, we're slaves. They know what we're talking about. We're not in Israel. Even the people that live in Israel, the people that live in Jerusalem, you're not in Israel. Israel is not just a geographical area or a political, how do you say, boundaries or something like that. That's also Israel. Of course it is Israel. You can't make Israel in Chicago or somewhere. Of course it is. But that's not truly what Israel is. We'll see in a moment. Let's see. We'll see. There we go. Okay, why does it have to be? What does it say? This is we are now in Passover. This is the holiday of Passover. This is the bread of affliction. We're going to say this in the night. We point to the matzah and say, this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Israel and in the land of Egypt. I'm sorry, in the land of Egypt. Anyone who what do you say? Who is the cast down can come and eat. Anyone who needs to can eat Pesach. Okay. All of a sudden, it sticks on the end. Now we are here. Next year we're going to be in Israel. Now we are slaves. Next year we're going to be free. Why stick that on? What's it got to do with Passover? It has nothing. This thing about now we are here. We're going to be in Israel. Now we are slaves. We're going to be in free. What's that got to do with the whole night of Passover? This is a thing on its own. Asher b'yamei galus, that in the time of exile, that this was, we said this, bishvila and yanim, because of the poor people, the ein lem tzorich Pesach, they don't have any necessity of Pesach. Hayatzorich l'sayim, we have to end up come and eat. with us. Anyone who is desperate, come and eat with us. Right? Anyone who needs to can come and eat the Passover of it. This isn't a time when the people didn't have. You can invite. There's another. We'll see in the. I'll put this up. The Rebbe asked another question. Also, what are we announcing? Anyone who wants to come, please come and partake of my Pesach offering. Come and eat with us. When do we say this? When we're at home. We're already at home. Why not? You should announce this when you're in the synagogue. At least then there's people. Why saying no? Anyone who's hungry, come and eat. Who's hungry? Everyone's sitting at the table. The doors are closed. Nobody hears you. Over there, we'll see it says, no, what we're saying here is what God is saying. God is saying to us that if you're cast down tonight, I'm giving you whatever you want. God is inviting us. We're just quoting what God is saying this night. But here's a little bit of a different answer. Now, according to what we said before, that this is part of the Haggada, and lo b'tor hakdama, this is not just a preface to the Haggada, so we can understand simply. Ki mishat yetzias Mitzrayim, from the time the Jews left Egypt, hutchalnu, we have begun hagu'ula atida. It's begun this whole process, which is called the future redemption. Like it says, ki mei tzeitchem eretz Mitzrayim. Like the sentence says in the prophet Micha, in the future redemption is going to be like the days of leaving Egypt, plural. I will show you miracles. So that's what he's saying. You think you left Egypt? No way. What I just showed you was just like we say, a free sample. It was just a little bit of a preview of what's going to be. Just now the fact of the matter is everyone is hungry. Everyone is desperate. You might not know it, but God is saying that you are. And tonight I'm going to fulfill whatever you need. The night of Passover, you're going to get a little bit of a glimpse of power that you can go to the future redemption. So that's what it means. Hey, Lachmanya is talking about now we are in eating bread of affliction in the exile. As long as all the Jews are not aware of what it means to be a Jew, then even if they're living in Israel, they're living in Jerusalem, it doesn't make any difference. As long as any Jew, the most religious Jew, the most a spiritual Jew, the most awakened Jew, right, enthusiastic Jew, we're in Gullus, we're in exile, we're not in Israel the way it's supposed to be. The main thing of Israel is supposed to be a land that reveals God. That everyone in the world will come, they come to the land of Israel, wow, God exists, God is creating me. I'm so happy that I'm being created. That's what everybody feels. That's the true land of Israel. So as long as we're not there, so everyone is eating the bread of affliction, and everyone is desperate for food, and everyone is hungry, and etc. For spiritual. Okay, number one. Number two, it is a good thing that on the second night of Passover, outside of Israel, right, you should make some sort of an extra, make a mention or at least something about the meal that Esther made. Remember this? So we just finished the holiday of Passover, Purim. Well, how did the holiday of Purim go? The timeline, a little bit. Haman threw lots to kill, destroy, liquidate all the Jews. And it was like I think the first day of Nisan, first day. A week, 2 weeks later, it doesn't say clearly exactly when he threw the lots, but it was before Passover. He threw the lots and it came out a decree to kill all the Jews. Mordechai and everybody found out about it. And he said to Esther, go and try to convince the king to rescind this decree. So Esther, first she tried to get out of it. And finally she said, okay, tell all the Jews to fast. So they fasted. How did the Jews fast? They fasted the holiday of Passover. That's when it was. Just a couple of weeks after Haman made the decree. They made one meal. That was the first day of Passover. The second day was the second day of Passover. And the second day, she said, who wants to, and she said, oh, your Majesty, there's somebody who wants to kill all of my people. I'm a Jew. First of all, she didn't tell him she was a Jew until the second day. She said, I'm a Jew. And there's a person that wants to kill all of my people, including me. And the king said, who's that? She said, Haman. Haman, meanwhile, had built a big, huge gallows, which was about, I don't know, 7 stories high or something like that, because he wanted everybody to see. He was going to hang Mordechai on it. And the king says, wow, Haman wants to kill my beloved wife. That's pretty bad. Anyway, so the king goes out for a couple of minutes. That was the meal. The meal happened on the second day of Passover. He goes out for a while. Haman stumbles, falls on Esther. They were laying there together. He was on top of her. And the king back and says, I don't believe it, Haman. This is just, you're trying to rape my wife with me in the house. Take him and kill him. Take him and kill him. So that's what he did. On that day, he was killed. Well, that's pretty good. So Haman was killed on that day, but the decree was still there, and the whole miracle of Purim happened almost a year later. Okay. In other words, Haman was killed. Haman died. So it said on this day, that was the day that Haman was hung. So we should make a certain, the second day of Pesach. At first glance, it says in the law book, and the Magen Avram says, at first glance, it's not understood. So the miracle of Purim, this is a very secondary thing. Velo tofas makom, in regard to the miracle of Passover. Kegula's Passover, the redemption of Passover. This was a complete redemption, which is not the case on Purim. It says akate abde achashverosh. On Purim, we don't even say Hallel, because basically we have the same mindset as we did back then. We're still the slaves of Achashverosh. They were in exile back then, and they were under the king Achashverosh, and the same thing is right now. Right? We're under Achashverosh. Just look and see, the what is it, the country of Israel, what is it called? They're worried about what Russia says and what this says and what that says. We're servants to the whole world. If so, Moshiach, why are we mentioning the miracle of Purim on Passover? Why should we make a mention of Purim on Passover? You want to make a mention on Purim? Make a mention on Purim. On Purim, says the Rebbe, and make it a law. Why should it be a law that you should talk something about Purim, how Haman was killed on Purim on the second day of Passover? Why? Says the Rebbe, the fact is, it's Purim. There is something about Purim even better than than going out of Egypt and Matan Torah. Like it says, Kimu v'kim lo Yudim. We finished that. On Purim, even though it was a very short-lived thing, but all the Jews got the point of giving the Torah, namely self-sacrifice. It says only on Purim, which was about 1,000 years after they received the Torah, that the Jews really get the point of receiving the Torah. Kachish ma'ila b'Purim. So there's an advantage of Purim, something better about Purim than going out of Egypt. This is the preparation and the beginning, because Passover is just a preparation for going out of Egypt. Is just a preparation for receiving the Torah. And receiving the Torah, the Jews didn't really receive it, get the point, until 1,000 years later on Purim, when they were willing to sacrifice their lives for their Judaism. Like it says, the whole idea of going out of Egypt was to receive the Torah. Going out of Egypt was to receive the Torah. But this all came from above. Going out of Egypt and receiving the Torah, God did the whole business himself. Milamayla, from above to below. Yetzias Mitzrayim, when the Jews left Egypt, God revealed himself, Melech Malchei Amlachim, the King of Kings, God, and he redeemed them. In Matan Torah, it says he held the mountain over their heads, which is not the case on Purim. On Purim, Ba came by means of the service of the Jewish people from below to above. She'amdu Shana, that they were one whole year, they stood in self-sacrifice. According to the way Chabad explains Purim, that Haman said, I want to kill all the Jews. And the decree was to kill all the Jews. And if a Jew would just make a statement, I'm not Jewish, then he wouldn't be in any danger. And not one Jew said it or even thought to say, I'm not a Jew, for one full year. That's the point of the Torah. Through Jewish identity, what Jewish identity is, that we're servants of God. We're going to do what God wants. You want to die? Don't want to die, but I can't not do what God wants. That's my essence. That they got the point on Purim. On Pesach, they didn't have really any choice. God did everything for them. Even though that there's there's a tremendous advantage from if God does it all. It's called eteruta de leila. If God does it all, this is much better in quality and etc. than if the Jews do it on their from below. Because no matter what we do, it's always going to be limited. It's never going to be complete, which is not the case. If God does everything, then it's complete. If God doesn't, God can do whatever he wants. But nevertheless, there's something better about serving God from below, doing it all on our own, than if God helps us. Why? Because even though God always helps us, God does the whole thing. But still, in Purim, it seemed to be that God abandoned them. The decree was to kill all the Jews. If God was with them, then he would make it that there was no more decree. That's all. That would be it. But no, that's not what it was. The decree stayed there. The Jews seemed that that's it, that God wasn't helping them. And nevertheless, they said, we don't care what God does for us. We're doing it all for God. We're not leaving God. That's an arousal from below. Okay, we see that what happened in Purim, it didn't last long. That was before the second temple. The second temple was destroyed, right? So it didn't last long, this self-sacrifice, which is not the case. God helping us going out of Egypt, that lasts until now. God is still helping us. So it says, if there's an arousal from above, then God does it, then it's perfect. God does it. Maybe we don't accept it. But it says, nevertheless, says the Rebbe, it still is better if we do it on our own in one way. Because if God does everything on its own, it doesn't last in the person. And it's not inside of him. Because there was no preparation for this, which is not the case. Purim, the whole thing of Purim, that's an arousal from us. It's still inside of us, the self-sacrifice, it's there. Therefore, we should make a little bit of a mention on Purim in Passover, because the Purim has the advantage of we did it all ourselves. And on Passover is even a greater thing, that God did everything. Therefore, we have a higher light is revealed on Passover, because it's one that comes from above to below, but also we make the vessel for it that it'll be able to last longer. That's why it's specifically on the second day of Passover, as we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. Now let's do the Yom Yom. 1 second, let's do this here.